and the Ministry of Labor and Social Security platforms, Facebook, YouTube. We are also on GIS, YouTube, and Facebook. We're broadcasting live on Nationwide and also Power 106 and the Jamaica News Network TV. So welcome, stay tuned, enjoy the discussions, quite an interactive session, and you'll be able to submit your questions, concerns, comments live or through our various social media handles. So our first presenter, Ms. Michael Ann Urquhart, is the Senior Director of Research and Measurement at the Jamaica Productivity Center. In this capacity, she undertakes policy-oriented and problem-solving research related to various dimensions of productivity. Her research and publications also focuses on development economics, labor market dynamics, and the impact of human capital attainment. So, Michael Ann, the Jamaica Productivity Center is fulfilling its mandate in promoting productivity efficiency and has studied Jamaica's response to the implementation of flexible work arrangements and in particular remote work. What are your findings? Please share with us, Michael Ann.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you for having the Jamaica Productivity Center to be a part of this session. We're always happy for the opportunity to spread the message of the importance of productivity, and especially in the context of flexible work arrangements, there is a lot of context in which we have to realize that we can improve productivity while at the same time making beneficial life improvements for our workers. Now, good morning to all of the panelists and to all of the viewers. For today's presentation, before I take you through the different findings, I'd like to first kind of give an introduction as to where we are as it relates to productivity in Jamaica, and then I'll bring the discussion to see how productivity is linked to flexible work arrangements. So a little bit about JPC. JPC is an organization within the Ministry of Labor and Social Security that is tasked with measuring, monitoring, and helping the country to improve productivity so that we can help to build an enabling environment for economic growth. And we do this by offering productivity audits and assessments for different firms or companies. And we also monitor and track and estimate productivity statistics. So the question is now, what is productivity? We can't talk about it if we don't know what it is. So when we talk about productivity, we're thinking about how efficiently we're able to move our inputs and turn them into outputs. And we can think about measuring our outputs, our productivity rate in terms of the amount, the value, or the quality of the outputs that we are creating. This is important because what we do know is that productivity is the only true way that we can have a long-term sustainable economic growth and improved standard of living for all of our citizens. It's because it allows us to reduce waste and to use our inputs more efficiently. So let's look at the trend across for Jamaica over time and see how it compares against the rest of the world. When we talk about productivity, we can talk about it in different dimensions. One such dimension is labor productivity. So to the left of this table, you would see that we have some figures that looks at labor productivity growth, and the numbers presented are actually an annual average over that 10-year period that goes from 2010 to 2019. So for Jamaica labor productivity, we see that on average, we've been declining each year by 1.3% over the last 10 years. When we compare it to other countries, we see for the US, they were growing at 1.1%. Barbados, we also see they actually had an on average increase in productivity. And for the Dominican Republic, we also see that they were increasing as well. And what we realize over time is that while world productivity growth rates have been slowing down, Jamaica's rates have been slowing, but also declining, and then becoming wider and farther apart from our trading partners and other countries. If we also look at total factor productivity really just means that if we are looking at the other variables that might impact productivity growth other than labor or capital, other variables could be technology, could be education, could be soft skills, our enabling environment, our level of innovation, and all these factors can also impact productivity. So when we're looking at the growth in total factor productivity, we're capturing the impact that those have had on productivity. So if we're looking at Jamaica, we see that Jamaica's total factor productivity on average for the same 10-year period has been declining at a rate of 0.1% per year. And you can compare that to the US, which has been growing at an average rate of 0.1%, and developing Asia, which is growing at a rate of 0.8%. Now let's bring this argument keep it within the region. Now, if we look across the region, the graph to the left is with the bars, is showing us that if we were to look at what productivity, labor productivity specifically, was in 2000, and we compare it to what it was in 2019, we would have seen that Jamaica's labor productivity would have declined by 15% compared to Trinidad and Tobago, which would have increased by 42%, and the Dominican Republic, which would have increased by 51%. The graph to the right with the lines shows a trend from 1950 to 2019 as to how the different economy or the different countries have been growing with relation to labor productivity. And what we see again is that over the recent decades, Jamaica's labor productivity has been generally on a declining trend, and we're actually moving farther away from our Caribbean partners that are increasing in labor productivity. So the question is, what is the reason for what is limiting our productivity in Jamaica? There are several reasons, right? One such reason is the fact that we have low economic complexity. We find that there are inefficient processes. And I should explain a little bit more about low economic complexity. When we speak to low economic complexity, we're actually speaking to the fact that if we look at our exports, for instance, a lot of our exports are low value added production, right? In addition to that, we don't have a lot of diversification in our export production. So if we are not producing goods that are high in value, then it's going to be hard for us to actually improve the value that we're getting from each unit of input that we are using in the production process. We find that in terms of inefficient processes, there might be bureaucratic red tape, poor ease of doing business. We also find that there's a job and skill mismatch, so that we find that we do have generally persons who are educated. However, it's not every time that persons have the skills that are required by the different jobs. And sometimes our skill sets tend to lag behind what the modern work world will also need. Other issues that might impact productivity in Jamaica include traffic. Our inability to move around efficiently can limit the amount of work that we have to do and how motivated we are to do the work once we start. There's also issues related to crime. Crime is an issue because, as you know, that can limit how persons are able to move around. It limits the amount of time that businesses are able to open. It also impacts how we use our resources, because we have to then divert our resources away from productive activity to security activities. We also think about the lack of technological integration. Generally in the Caribbean, what we find is that we tend to lag behind in terms of the level of adoption to technologies. And then finally, amongst other things, we find that we have comparatively low investments in research and development compared to countries that have higher levels of productivity. So in addition to what we've seen up to 2019 in terms of the change in labor productivity, we would also now realize that we are now been hit along with the rest of the world by COVID-19. Now, that has caused some lingering effects on our productivity. Now, by now, we would have all come to realize that these increased challenges would have come from the factor that persons were unable to move around because of restrictions to try and limit the spread of disease. This would have hampered the efficient running of supply chains. It would also create lower demand for goods and services. We also find that it had severe impacts for labor markets, where persons obviously were being laid off. They would have lost jobs. Persons became ill and were unable to work. We also find that in the long term, there's a possibility that it could impact human capital attainments, as children and even adult learners who would normally be accessing education without COVID are now being limited in terms of their access and might have to either repeat or held back or actually drop out of the education system. However, even with COVID, it's not all doom and gloom. We find that there have actually been the opportunity for us to build and to grow and to do so in a sustainable and a robust way. For instance, COVID has given us the opportunity to rethink how we do business, to rethink how we think about travel. So it allows us to change our management processes so that we don't maybe have to use as much paper. We can now integrate, we're forced to integrate with technology more. And these changes are actually going to be beneficial as we move along into the fourth industrial revolution. Now, let's look at what happened in Jamaica in 2020. So what we are seeing generally is that we anticipate that the official statistics, when they come out, will indicate that we will have a decline in labor productivity, probably around the region of about 5%. And this is based on the anticipation that real GDP for the year would have declined by approximately 9.9%, and that the employed labor force would have declined somewhere around 5% for the year as well. And what we find is that the decline in labor productivity was largely pushed by a decline in the real value added for the services sector, such as particularly hotels and restaurants, transportation, storage, and communication. And what you would also find in these industries that are shown here are that it was much harder for them to adapt to new technologies or to replace the labor with capital. So there were industries during the year, however, that we anticipate will have increased their labor productivity. For instance, we can look at electricity and water supply. We look at construction and finance and insurance services. And what's important about these is that these industries were able to adapt easily to technology and to adjust their management practices and to overcome the challenges that COVID would have presented with them. The additional challenge, however, while we see an increase in labor productivity, what we find in some of these industries is that there's actually a substitution of labor. So in some instances, they were able to actually just enhance how their workers or employees could work. But in other instances, you would see where physical offices were closing and there was a shift towards more virtual sessions. So this is positive in that we're increasing our productivity, but we want to make sure that we're not doing it at the cost of our labor force. Now, as we look as what we anticipate to happen as we move forward, our preliminary predictions for January to March 2021 quarter, if you compare it to the same quarter of the previous year, is that we will have a decline in productivity still that would range somewhere from about 1.2% and probably be as large as about 3.3%. And this, of course, is again predicated on the fact that real GDP is not or has declined compared to the previous period. So then the big question now, and why we're really all here, is to think about how flexible work arrangements is important to this discussion. So when we talk about flexible work arrangements, we're actually thinking about the different ways in which we can adjust for persons to have a better work balance. And that might include having things like flexi work time, staggered shifts, persons just simply working from home. And so what research has found internationally is that we see generally where flexible work arrangements will increase productivity at different abstractions of society. So we think about personally, flexible work arrangements can be beneficial because it allows employees to increase their work-life balance. It also allows them to be healthier, to be more motivated. It gives them the chance to build their self-discipline. We find that for companies, there is the possibility for them to reduce the cost that they may have because, again, we have healthier workers. You see that there's a reduction in persons coming in late to work because there's more flexibility in terms of how they work. Persons are less likely to report in absent for work because they have the ability to take care of their business, at more flexible times. And we also find a reduction in presenteeism. When we talk about presenteeism, that's where people show up to work, but the rate at which they work is below what they're really able to do because they're probably not well, or their mind is thinking about other things that they might have to do. So what we find is that research has shown that companies that have been implementing different types of flexible work arrangements have found that there's an increase generally on average in terms of job satisfaction, job retention rates, persons' loyalty towards their company, the positive feelings that they have towards the workplace. We also find that it's potential for companies to reduce their costs. They don't have to necessarily have to pay rents and have brick and mortar facilities. They may also use less utilities. We also see that it may help with improved decision making, as some of the processes that need to be involved with creating a manageable flexible work arrangement will also allow us to do things more efficiently in terms of using technology, amongst other things. And then finally, at the national level, what we see is that productivity has long-term multiplying effects. So when we have a healthier workforce, we have families that are more engaged with one another. This has implications for how society connects with one another, how well persons are educated. And as you can see, the long-term benefits will go on from there. And of course, we're talking about a reduction in waste. People might not have to spend as much time if they can travel around traffic, for instance. But there are some hesitancies when it comes to flexible work arrangements and how they're implemented. One of the things internationally that has kind of, even in Jamaica as well, has driven people away from wanting to engage with these type of arrangements is that it would actually cause a decline in productivity. So there's this idea that workers are not able to properly monitor themselves, or that we don't have the proper systems in order to monitor our workers. There's also the idea that there's going to be inconsistent implementation processes, that if it's not streamlined, it won't work properly. And there's also the worry that for persons who are now working at home, if their firm or their company is not willing to foot their costs, that means that they're now paying more to work at home. So they now require to supply themselves with a computer to make sure that they have reliable internet access, to pay more for utilities. And then some persons actually believe that work from home actually interferes with the work-life balance, because now you are more likely to be able to take your work anywhere, and you're taking your work out of the workplace and into your home. Now, the JPC has been in the process of collecting data through a productivity perception survey, of which I'm going to ask for you to actually complete. It will be shared in the chat, so you can click on the link and you can be a part of the discussion. And so what we have found so far is that with this particular module, we're actually looking at flexible work arrangements, right? And so we have been asking persons to indicate whether or not their organization has been implementing flexible work arrangements before COVID, or only since COVID has been implemented, or have they been actually implementing COVID before and after. And so what I'm going to present to you today is really what people feel about, since our results are still preliminary, just what people feel about what flexible work arrangements means for them and for their company. So firstly, we find that 90% of the 90% of the respondents indicated that flexible work arrangements were offered by the organization, where most of them actually indicated that they had flexible work arrangements in place even before COVID-19 came about. So the popular flexible work arrangements that were identified were flexi time, staggered shifts, and reduction in office hours. And then with the advent of COVID-19, we'd actually seen where people were completely now working from home. So why did people think that working from home was beneficial, or any type of flexible work arrangements? Well, some persons felt that it allowed them to get more work done. They felt positive because it increased their work-life balance. They realized that it helped them to motivate them to do more tasks. They found that they were actually saving in terms of time, traveling, and in terms of the cost that it would take them to travel. They felt that now they were pushed to have a higher level of accountability to prove that they were doing work while they were at home. You found that for some persons, they felt it was dependent on persons having good resources or access to resources at home. And then they also found that the complementary resources that are needed for flexible work arrangements allowed for teams to now be more flexible and to be more productive. And some persons actually found that they had less distractions working at home. Now, for those who felt that flexible work arrangements were not useful, some actually thought that persons were just doing the same amount of work, so it didn't have any change on productivity. Some realized that there are definitely jobs that require persons to be in the workplace, either because of record keeping, confidentiality issues. Some persons also felt that it was hard to navigate, depending on the type of work that they were doing, to get things done because there were lockdowns during this period. Some persons felt that there were changes that were made to introduce flexible work arrangements, but didn't fully complement the process. And then, of course, persons made the argument that for them, they didn't see where the necessary infrastructure was in place for them to be able to access and fully use the tools associated with flexible work arrangements. So then the question becomes then, what do we do to ensure that we have more persons indicating that flexible work arrangements are a benefit, right? So we want to make sure that we actually have the create enabling environment so that we have flexible work arrangements that can help persons to maintain the work-life balance, but also build productivity for people, the companies, as well as the nation. So we have to think about technology and connectivity, making sure that that infrastructure is in place. We need to make sure that there's proper partnerships between our trade unions, our employees, our workers, our government administrators, and regulators to make sure that the ideas and the messaging relating to flexible work arrangements is consistent and a compromised view where both parties see the benefit and recognize what they have to add to it. We need to think about education and knowledge sharing and knowledge spillover in the process, where we see if one company or we find a particular way of implementing flexible work arrangements that's successful, finding ways to share that across the board. We also need to find ways to have persons be more integrated with the process. And then finally, we want to look at trying to find ways to motivate firms to realize that flexible work arrangements can work for them. Now, here at the JPC, I would have mentioned before that we do offer productivity audits and assessments. So if your institution or your entity is looking at trying to implement flexible work arrangements, but you're worried about how it might affect your level of productivity, we have a team of specialists that can help you. So you can feel free to reach out to us. You can also feel free to reach out to us to get information and data and to find out more about our upcoming events, or just if you have questions about productivity. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Michaela, and you really shared some very interesting information with us. And I have just taken note, and very interestingly, you've indicated that Jamaica, in terms of productivity, is lagging behind some of our regional partners, countries such as St. Lucia, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago. And it is something that requires our urgent attention. And I recognize that you've also said that some of the hindrances to productivity include inefficient processes, job and skill mismatch, lack of technological integration, lack of investment in research and development. And these, I believe, are very key to Jamaica's progress in terms of advancing flexible work arrangements. And I recognize also that this comment is relevant to micro, small, medium, and even the very large enterprises. So I hope that those listening will recognize that these are some key areas for intervention. And you also had a very interesting slide up that spoke about connectivity, the technological connectivity, education, ensuring that persons are aware of how to better use technology to make remote work and flexible work arrangements a success. Also, the partnerships that are needed. And today we have with us employers and trade union representation and the government. So we have that tripartite representation that is going to be necessary to take us forward. And also you spoke about the motivation and capital investment that's needed. All right, so thank you very much for that informative presentation, and we'll come back to you with questions. I would like to welcome those persons who are just joining us and introduce myself. I'm Julian Corodas, Divisional Director, Industrial Relations and Allied Services in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, and I'm your moderator for today. We will now hear from our next presenter, Mr. Lauren Marsh. And Lauren, Dr. Marsh.
Good morning, Jillian. How are you doing?
How are you?
I'm good.
He's acting head of the Hugh Shearer Labor Studies Institute at the University of the West Indies Open Campus. He has worked with organizations locally and regionally on employment and labor market trends. His areas of specialization are disciplinary procedures, grievance handling, sexual harassment, and Jamaican labor laws. Mr. Marsh has drafted employment policies and handbooks for several prominent private and public sector companies in the Caribbean. Now, Mr. Marsh, the Hugh Shearer Labor Studies Institute has been engaged in training and development of worker representatives and I think also employers. Now, you have also conducted research related to the impact of flexi work. I know that you are a partner working on the COVID-19 labor market task force response. And just wanting to find out from you, what are your interesting findings in research on flexible work arrangements?
Thank you, Ms. Carolus. Good morning, colleagues,
good morning.
Fellow panelists, and good morning, participants. My presentation today, I'm going to share my screen with you.
Go ahead, sure.
Yes, my presentation will focus on a piece of research that we're doing in collaboration with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, entitled, hold on, Julie, all right.
Yes, we're seeing
You're seeing my screen now.
Exactly.
Good. Entitled Impact of COVID-19 on Jamaican Workers, Vulnerabilities and Strategic Responses. So a bit of background about the study. Essentially, our overarching objective is to examine what is the impact of COVID-19 on workers in the private and public sector. But a component of this particular research also focuses on flexible work arrangements. Thus far, we have 745 respondents, most of which are women from the public sector. And this study, I'm very proud about it and excited because we did a similar study in 2017 on flexible work arrangements. And the limitation was, our major limitation was that many workers who are in the sample population did not understand what flexible work arrangements were in Jamaica. Also, many were very suspicious of employers because they believe that the implementation of flexible work arrangements would reduce their compensation and, of course, cut their overtime payments. So the fact is, this research is somewhat different because I'm realizing from the findings thus far that workers are more receptive of flexible work arrangements. No, the fact is, workers are showing an increased interest in flexible work arrangements, specifically telecommuting or flexiplace. We're also seeing that millennials and Generation Z, which make up the majority of the Jamaican labor force, are especially interested in flexi work. This means to me that the truth is flexi work is with us, it's here to stay, because the younger generations have embraced this concept. And therefore, I predict that this is how the workforce or this is how the labor market will be structured going forward. However, from the research, we're seeing where there needs to be greater sensitization, both and consultation for workers as it pertains to matters surrounding flexible work arrangements. As it pertains to sensitization, we're seeing that workers, many low-income workers, are still not familiar with the concept itself, which means that myself, Gillian, at the Institute, and yourself at the Ministry of Labor, we need to do more work in sensitizing workers and preparing them for flexible work arrangements. Also, on the matter of consultation, what we're finding in this research is that many employers believe that they're not being consulted with when employers are implementing flexible work arrangements, and in many cases are remote working conditions. So we need to also be reminded that, employers need to be reminded that the Labor Relations Code speaks to the need to consult with your workers if you intend to change your work arrangement. So I am urging employers to consult with the workers if you intend to implement flexible work arrangements. It shouldn't be an informal agreement or verbal conversation. It may, in some cases, need to be contractual, and possibly Carla can expound on that a bit more. We also found that many employers believe that employers are now relying mainly on flexible work arrangements during the pandemic. An interesting finding from a study was that many employees understand that their employers are facing hardships, and they're very concerned about job security. So my advice is that companies, whether public or private, should not hasten to make positions redundant. What you can do is speak to your employees, explain the situation to them, and of course, you may find suitable alternatives to redundancy exercises. One alternative could be flexible work arrangement, others could be transfers and so on. But the fact is, workers they understand the situation and they're willing to compromise. In terms of the impact of COVID-19, what we found was that many workers in the sample, or most workers, believe that COVID-19 has impacted their social lives negatively, and they were not interacting as much with their family, friends, and other loved ones. And the percentage is there, 78.2%, 72.82% believes that. There's also an issue because many workers believe that their compensation, their salaries, have been negatively impacted by COVID-19, and you have their 39.89%. So the fact is, flexible work arrangements is a viable option for many employers because it will allow workers to possibly seek work elsewhere, and it may give them more time to interact with their families or friends during this particular period. But there are some issues, there are some concerns which are coming from the study. There are some workers who believe that under COVID-19, they're experiencing greater increase in work if they're working from home. They believe that in cases where persons are laid off, they sometimes have to take on the additional work. Secondly, in terms of remote working, there's a view that there's a lack of concentration or distractions because at times the family is home or whatever it is, the neighbors making noise, it may cause serious distractions. Thirdly, if working from home or working remotely, you may find that in some cases workers are not given the sufficient smart tools and technology to work from a remote location, or if there are the technology as well. So these concerns tie directly into if the employer is utilizing telecommuting or flexiplace. These three considerations are very important. Of course, workers also explain that there's less responsiveness to emails and WhatsApp when they're working remotely or working from home, because sometimes they can't get to their superiors or to the manager, and the exchanges are sometimes delayed because they are working from home and not in the physical office space. And lastly, there is a view by some employees in the study that the work environment itself is not conducive to productive work. There are issues in many cases with the workstations. And I'll also say to employers that before you send workers home to work, you need to ensure that they have adequate tools and they're comfortable in the work environment itself. That is critical. As I mentioned to you earlier, implementing flexible work arrangements is not just a verbal conversation, it is a formal agreement, and all these particular concerns must be addressed by the employer. Before I end the presentation, there are some lessons learned. And the fact is, as I mentioned to you earlier, we have to embrace the concept of flexible work arrangement. We have to get used to working remotely because that is where the labor market is going. That's where it is at this particular moment. And as I mentioned, Generation Z and the millennials, they have embraced the concept of flexible work arrangements. Also, I see where there's a great need for more technical support, especially for employers in drafting policies. I believe, Gillian, that we possibly need to indulge in some kind of campaign or some initiative to assist employers in how to draft flexible work arrangement policies. Right, Carla? I see you nodding. That is definitely needed. I do it here, so if colleagues want support, they can always contact me at the Hugh Sherry Labor Studies Institute, but there needs to be that particular kind of support. For employers, yes, I believe so, Julian. And for workers, there needs to be greater sensitization and training as it pertains to what exactly is flexible work arrangements. And lastly, the point was mentioned here earlier that the whole thought of having an employee working from home must be discussed with the employee thoroughly. And the study has shown that many employers are not doing that. It must be discussed. And in some cases, the employer may have to provide some amount of training and sensitization to the employee before they immerse them in any kind of flexible work arrangement, or more specifically, work from home or working remote arrangement. That is important. So, Gillian, before I go, I want to just give persons an idea of what your policy could look like if you intend to have workers working from home. And there are various sections there. They can look at it. I won't go through them individually. But the fact is, for persons who are logged in, if you intend to have persons work from home, you may have to implement some kind of agreement which looks something like this. Gillian, it's not for sale, yes? I see you looking at it, right? But it will be shared with colleagues if they want it.
No problem, no problem.
Good.
Thanks for sharing. And I'm sure that the listeners and viewers will be very interested in what you have presented.
They can have a copy of it because it is very necessary for employers especially.
Okay.
Good. And you had told me 10 minutes, so I just did my presentation within that particular time frame. The fact is the study is ongoing, and there will be more information divulged with the public at a later date. But thus far, the findings are very profound. And I want to thank the Ministry of Labour and Social Security publicly for assisting us with this particular research project. Thanks again, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And
you're most welcome.
Very, very interesting presentation. Just reminding our participants that we are streaming live on the Nationwide and also Power 106, and also that you can watch us on Jamaica News Network. We heard from you, Lauren, that the issue with remote work is partly a fear of the unknown, that workers are not aware of what are the details, the ins and outs, the advantages, disadvantages of engaging in remote work. And I heard you saying that it's important for employers to have a discussion, communicate and consult with the workers so that, one, there is proper documentation and representation of this change to the original contract. I also heard you saying clearly that the workplace employers should provide this fertile environment for the implementation of remote work. So just as we are planting this Labor Day, we know that we have to prepare our soil. Similarly, with remote work, we have to prepare the minds of both the workers, their supervisors even, as we try to implement flexible work arrangements. So thank you very much, Lauren. And the link for persons to participate in your survey will be made available in the chat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your work in terms of labor relations here in Jamaica.
Thank you, Gillian.
So you're welcome, Lauren. Stand by for questions. We will move to our next presenter, and she is Mrs. Carla Ann Harris Roper. And Carla Ann, as many of us know her and can affectionately call her, because she's such a household name, has a passion for employment law, being an attorney, and labor relations. Her broad and varied career as a labor and employment relations practitioner in the corporate world, as well as a former legal officer and prosecutor in the public sector and published employment law author, makes her a unique and valuable choice as an experienced advisor, adjudicator, mediator, and consultant. And very importantly, Carla Ann Harris Roper has worked tirelessly on what we have as our Jamaican law, the Labor Relations and Industrial Disputes Act. And also, she worked as legal counsel, lead legal counsel, as the government of Jamaica established the Employment Flexible Work Arrangements Act in 2014. So Carla Ann is very conversant with the legislative parameters, having been one to craft them and to review as they have been. Now, Carla Ann, you have worked with many organizations as legal counsel, very large organizations in some instances. You have also represented workers, individual workers. And in terms of implementation of flexible work arrangements, you would have first-hand experience and knowledge of what happens on the ground. What are the challenges and what are some of the lessons that have been learned? And also, I want you to focus on what are the policy responses or legislative responses that will take us forward, projecting and positioning Jamaica as a regional leader in remote work. Carla Ann, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gillian, and the rest of the panel members, and indeed all Jamaica that may be listening, via the various media. It's a very challenging time that we have all been forced to live in, and it's not gone away. It's still here with us, and therefore we all have to learn how to manage within the current labor and employment law landscape. Now, you have pointed to the fact that we did have the Employment Flexible Work Arrangement Miscellaneous Provisions Act passed by our Parliament in 2014. And I'm a student of history. And so quickly, we need to appreciate that this was coming to us from a long time. Coming from the Eaton Report in the 1990s, I think reviewed in the labor market report back in 2018, being led by Lloyd Woodley, and has been, from a policy perspective, something that has been looked at long even before COVID to give us a competitive advantage in the global village, right? So this act that was passed was really what we call umbrella overarching act. And what it really did was to look at the various pieces of legislation in Jamaica that had restrictive provisions that would stop the various entities from legally operating in a flexible way. So for example, we had the Women Employment of Act that really stopped women from working certain hours in the night. Gratefully, that whole act was repealed by virtue of this piece of legislation. But even as the act has come into force, and has amended various pieces of legislation. So the Minimum Wage Act, the Holidays Public General, various acts have been amended to take out restrictive provisions.
Right.
What has also happened is that people need to appreciate that this act does not implement flexible work arrangements.
Mhm.
What it does is to provide an opportunity for it to be brought into being. And that's why it's important to have listened to Lauren and Michaela to recognize that this is not something that can be or should be unilaterally imposed, right? It really goes to the heart of the employment contract, the terms and conditions under which people work. Yes? And if it is that persons would have previously had particular provisions, but employer cannot unilaterally just change it unless they have a contractual provision that allows that to occur. And so that's part of the challenge that we have seen. Now that COVID-19, with its specificities, has come into effect and has made it an imperative for us to have less movement, less persons in confined spaces, such as many workplaces. We are now turning to flexible work arrangements. But what is happening is that many people simply do not have enough information, enough um, framework documents to assist them in making that change. And so we really need to have policy guidelines. What has happened for many other countries, I remember you asked me to look at that, is that in some countries, what actually happens is that persons have the right in law to make an application to work flexibly, right? So what happens and that we have to appreciate is that no country that I have looked at in my research so far makes it mandatory for flexible work arrangements to be implemented. What it does, certainly for employees, is to provide them with an opportunity dependent on their status to be able to apply to the employer to work flexibly and for the employer to take a reasonable approach in examining whether or not this can be um, facilitated. Because the truth is, some roles simply cannot, are not amenable to being operated flexibly. And we have to appreciate that. And flexible work arrangement is not anything new in Jamaica. People within the hotel industry, the bauxite industry, public transportation, health, public cleansing, all of these people have been working over a long time flexibly. But those things have been accepted by virtue of what has happened. No, we have all been pulled into this new paradigm. And so for me, when we look at the other countries, what they have done is had a national code of practice or platform that will provide simple guidelines for anyone who doesn't have a big HR department or a big employment law attorney who can help them. So they have a very basic documentation setting out what are the various types of flexible work arrangements that persons can consider, how it is that they are to do this balancing and to review, and how to set out the policy and to operate it, how to train their managers in terms of seeing how the various issues can be accommodated, productivity, resources, and so on. So, for example, in the UK, the ACAS, that is part of their regulatory body, has online a code of practice in terms of how you can apply, how employers are to review, how do you communicate, and things of that nature. And I believe that if it is that we are to go forward, we really, as a country, doing the requisite tripartite consultations, examining what happens elsewhere. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we must certainly look at our intrinsic local imperatives to ensure that we capture all of what needs to make it organic to us and provide a basic legal structure and framework that would have a minimum standard, just like the Minimum Wage Act that has a minimum basic standard. And then we encourage employers, those that have all the resources and can help to, have bigger and greater policy structures in place to utilize that. So some people think the Labor Relations Code is a bad word simply because of how, certain aspects of it has evolved over time. But think of it in that way.
I'm happy for the encouragement you're giving, Caroline, that the Labor Relations and Industrial Disputes Act and the labor legislation is really geared at protecting both the rights of workers and employers alike.
That's correct. And so basically, I think we need to start doing some heavy lifting. The JPC and the Hugh Lawson Shearer Trade Union Education Institute has started the ball by getting us raw data. We can then use that along with all the other secondary sources of data and other, persons, other countries that would have looked at this matter and faced it head on, and to come together and pull together at least that code to help everyone, because it's not going to go away. Now it's going to be much more prevalent, and you definitely have to be doing some weighing exercises in terms of employee rights and employer rights and all those things, because it's contractual. It goes to the heart of the terms and conditions of someone's employment. So I'm not sure if there's much more I can add to the questions, but that's really where we are. Oh, one last thing, especially in the service industries, where they're going to be putting out more intellectual type of work. If you're going to have flexible work arrangements, you must have strong IT support. And I don't just mean hardware in terms of having a device. We are very, very much exposed to nefarious persons in the internet space. So everybody recalls how half of southern United States the other day could barely get gas because there was this issue that they were hacked. The petroleum pipeline was hacked. So we must have robust systems, to also facilitate these changes. At the base of it, think of your family, think of your welfare, because no good worker is going to be able to work and give you the best productivity without them having the support. And that's it for me for now.
Thank
Jillian, you're muted. Jillian, we're not hearing you.
Thank you very much, Wayne.
Yes.
Right, Caroline Harris-Roper, thank you so much for that very informative presentation. You did indicate that flexible work arrangements will be here to stay. It's not going away. It is going to be here. And definitely, we all need to come together to do the heavy lifting. Yes, the labor legislation has created that enabling environment, but we have to sit together, discuss, and work out those protocols. And I do hear you suggesting that there are some industries that are well acquainted with flexible work arrangements, the bauxite industry, the hotel industry, and they can give us some very useful pointers, and that a national code needs to be developed with guidelines to assist both workers and employers and their representatives as we go further or advance in flexible work arrangements. So that, I'm sure, will present food for thought, and we stand by for the questions in the Q&A segment. in relation to some of the things that you would have said. At this time, I'm going to be welcoming my own colleague from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. And many persons, I say, will know the name Michael Kennedy, but they may not have met Mr. Michael Kennedy before. I know that he's adjusting his camera so that we can see clearly. So Mr. Michael Kennedy is the Chief Director of Industrial Relations in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. He has worked with this ministry for 33 years in the field of industrial relations and has worked tirelessly with both workers and employers. He started off as a labor officer and now heads the industrial relations arm of the ministry. And he has also worked as a tutor of industrial relations. Michael Kennedy, my colleague and friend, over to you. What are the concerns that you have heard expressed from both workers and employers? What is the feedback in relation to the flexible work arrangements and even the legislation that relates to employment flexible work arrangements? Michael Kennedy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Coronas, and good morning to everybody. Having some difficulties with my video, which actually turned back ways, so I don't know how I'm going to. My daughter is not here to give me any assistance, so I'm still working on that.
Well, please proceed without camera, and at a later juncture in Q&As, I'm sure we'll be able to see the face of Michael Kennedy.
Yes, I'll try to do that. All right, we have been talking about flexible work arrangement since this morning, and the majority of our discussions has centered around flexible work in respect to working from home. However, we have other aspects of flexible work that the ministry is very much aware of in terms of the employer reducing the working day. So you actually complete 40 hours in probably 3 days. And a lot of our employers are going that route in terms of flexibility. So there are different ways and different methods. They are not bulletproof. This is a relatively new method. This is a relatively new system being introduced here in Jamaica. And it's really not without problems. It has its pros and cons, like just any other working system that you have. However, what we have found is that happy workers are more productive than normal. And our first presenter from the Productivity Center did mention that workers are going to be much more productive when they are happy. Workers are a little bit happy now because they have been consulted, and this is in situations where they have been consulted in terms of arranging flexible work and choosing the arrangement in terms of the contract of employment, how they would work flexible. We have been having a lot of questions from both employers and workers. We have been having a lot of concerns. Truth be told, since the advent of COVID-19 a year or so ago, a lot of questions have been asked about our current labor laws and the applicability of them. Our labor laws are coming under pressure because both the employers and the workers are of the view that there is a labor law to answer any scenario and a labor law to answer any questions posed. From the employer's perspective, the questions coming in have to do with they can't monitor the activity of their workers properly. So workers are at home working, engaged, but they can't monitor the activities properly. In fact, one of our employers in the financial sector made a very spirited call to the ministry recently to say that they wanted to install a camera in the workers' home in order to see exactly what is being done there and if the labor law permits that. So these are the sort of concerns. Another concern from the employers were that they are not able to monitor the commencement time for the workers. So workers might be told to work standard 8 to 5. They really don't know if the worker works 8 to 5, especially if the laptop is not one that is being monitored by an IT department company.
So the technology to monitor is a challenge.
Yes, it can be a challenge. On the other hand, we have had workers saying, I heard it being said, but it wasn't emphasized much this morning, should I be reimbursed for the additional electricity being used when I am working from home? We have had instances when workers get certain allowances. And one of the allowances that we have been seeing very frequently is a lunch allowance. When they are actually at work, they get this lunch allowance. The workers are saying, when I work from home, why shouldn't I be still entitled to that? Because the employers in most situations would have taken that allowance, that particular allowance away. So they are asking the ministry, shouldn't I be still entitled to that allowance, although I'm working from home? Then again, we have the matter of, and this is a very, very vexed matter, persons working on a late shift. They have transportation issues. And I'm just going to just quickly read a question that we got on our COVID hotline phone by WhatsApp without identifying company or person. Good morning, ministry. I have a question. So I'm working from a company where I have to do shifts from 4 p.m. to 1 a.m. However, because of the curfew, I have to stay at work until 6 a.m. because 5 a.m. is too early and a little bit too dark for me as a female to risk going on the road. Shouldn't the employer provide a drive for me to go home? This was a recent question we got in our WhatsApp messaging. So these are the issues that workers having. And another issue, it was also mentioned this morning by Mr. Marshall, overtime is not being recognized for the most part when the workers are working remotely and from home. So they don't stop at 5, they are in the whole groove of work, they continue on to probably 7, 8, 9, and they would have advised their employers, but it is not being recognized in terms of payment. So these are some of the issues that have been coming to the ministry quite frequently. Not 1 or 2 calls or questions on our WhatsApp, but we have been getting it quite regularly and quite frequently. So as we said, in any situation, there's pros and cons. A flexible work arrangement, though, from the Ministry of Labour can surely benefit both parties. It can benefit both the worker and it can benefit also the employer. There's no doubt about that. And as I normally say personally, better to work remotely or flexible because it assists in decreasing the chances of spreading the virus. And that is the real issue and the real reason why persons are engaging in this flexible work arrangement now. How can we decrease the spread of the virus? When too many workers are congregated at a particular place, then the risk of spreading the virus really increases very much. One last thing that we have noticed at the ministry in the same flexi arrangement is that sometimes there's a particular flexi arrangement, I've been hearing about it quite recently, where the worker, for instance, is to deliver baked products in a particular parish. They would normally come in office and stay for a while, take the orders, and then they go out. Now what the employers are doing is they are not concerned about the hours of work. They are not concerned about 8 hours being done. What they are mainly concerned about is getting the job done, getting the assignment done. So the worker can pick up the goods, leave. If it takes him 4 hours to deliver, fine. He carry back the truck to his home. The next morning he comes and it's back to the same thing. So these are the sort of flexi arrangements that we have been seeing at the ministry. Yes, there are questions, some of the questions. The labor law is silent on it. Our labor laws go back very far away in the 70s before most of us, if not a lot of us. So we are responding to them. Some we have to use common sense. We have to use the common law, as Ms. Carla and Roper, our risk counsel, would advise. And in some cases, we have to ask the worker and or the employer to get legal advice on it, because it goes far and beyond the whole realm of our current labor law. So these are the issues from the Ministry of Labor. It's a working process, and as Mr. Marsh correctly said, this is a phenomenon, this is a method of work that I think is going to be with us here in Jamaica and worldwide for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you have to unmute, Ms. Curtis.
Thank you very much. I thought I was unmuted. Thank you very much, Michael Kennedy from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, Chief Director, Industrial Relations. And Mr. Kennedy has indicated that there is mixed feeling, but a general encouragement to workers and employers that this is here to stay. And it is something that is not just local here in Jamaica, but regional. I heard you speak about it becoming a new norm, but there are some concerns, especially organizations that have collective labor agreements. How do they deal with the issues of overtime, certain benefits like shift allowance, and even the safety of workers as they commute physically on the flexible hours of the organizations? So that's a lot of food for thought, and you did tell us that you have been getting currently questions from both workers and employers relating to flexible work arrangements. And I just want to share with our listeners that there is a WhatsApp number to reach the industrial relations arm of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. And this is 876-582-8988. And this WhatsApp number will be shared in the chat. I want to welcome those persons who have joined us on Facebook. I understand that we have in the thousands that have joined us on Facebook, and I want to welcome you. Those who are streamed on YouTube, those that have joined us live on Nationwide, Power 106, and also will be joining us on Jamaica News Network. We also want to encourage you to share like and share in your social media, and encourage persons to just come on board and be updated and educated on the flexible work arrangements. At this time, I'll also share with you the toll-free numbers to reach the Ministry of Labor and Social Security to get more information on labor relation issues. And the numbers are 888-429-5657, and that goes up to 9. So those are the toll-free numbers to reach the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So it's 888-429-5657 or 888-429-5658 or 888-429-5659. And those are all toll-free numbers to reach the Ministry of Labor and Social Security in relation to any labor matter. All right, so we will be moving on in our presentation to hear from our next presenter. And our next presenter is one who is well known to the Jamaican employer and worker landscape. He has worked in many different spaces and spheres, served in many industries. And at this time, I introduce Mr. Wayne Chen. I wouldn't want to call your middle name, but perhaps I should. Mr. Wayne Christopher Chen. And he is showing us his background of the cool hills of Manchester, being from Manchester himself. Mr. Chen is a businessman since 1981. I think he would have been a businessman long before then, because he has always been involved in many areas. He has chaired many private sector entities and also serves the government of Jamaica as chairman of many of our public bodies, including the UDC, National Land Agency, LAMP, the National Gallery of Jamaica, and the list is so long. We also recognize that Mr. Chen has also served in the international community as part of the governing body of the International Labour Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. And he has also the current position of president of the Caribbean Employers Federation. Wayne, good morning.
Gillian.
And thanks for being here with us. We would love to hear from you in terms of what has been the reaction of employers locally as they contemplate or are actively implementing flexible work arrangements, and also regionally and internationally, what is happening? How do we position Jamaica as a regional leader in flexible work arrangements, or quote unquote remote work arrangements? And I'm not using them interchangeably.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks to my colleagues. I want to recognize Helene Davis-White and Carla and Roper and everybody present. I listened keenly to the earlier presentations. They were really, really substantive, and it would be good if they were shared with the wider audience.
We will ensure that is done.
And beyond today, because so many important and profound facts were presented today from the Productivity Center, from the Hugh Lawson Shearer Center. I should stop and remind folks that yesterday would have been the 98th anniversary of Hugh Lawson Shearer's birth. And I raise the point because one of the common themes that we would see here today, and it's not well known outside of this group, or I should say not well known enough, is it's the whole issue of tripartism and social dialogue. I can tell you I met Carla and first at the Labor Advisory Committee of the Ministry of Labor. Same for you, Gillian. And it's an important body, started in the early 1990s when Portia Simpson Miller herself was the Minister of Labor. And she has said to me personally and on many occasions that Hugh Lawson Shearer was her mentor. Many Jamaicans can't see beyond the partisan divide and understand how Jamaicans, many times down there at North Street, reached across the political divide, reached across the worker and employer divide, with government in the room, and through after tough negotiation, found labor peace and found common ground in this country.
And Wayne, I just want to remember that we had years ago where, for instance, in the bauxite sector, we had 20 hours of meetings that went straight through the wee hours of the morning. And as you indicated, there was absolutely no political divide in those meetings as we discussed the future of labor in that industry.
Well, I like to say the future of labor and employers, because precedents are set that will have far-reaching impacts and have had far-reaching impacts on employers. And since much of what I would love to have said has already been said, and not only said, but backed with solid work, whether it's surveys, whether it is the analysis of data. And it's important because policies and regulations and even attitudes must be data-driven. I am a great believer in using empirical data so we don't just repeat the mistakes of the past, so we don't waste valuable resources, and most important, we don't waste valuable time. So I want to focus on a couple of things that have been brought forward by this flexi work discussion. You're quite right that remote work and flexi work are not interchangeable, but flexi work is an important component of remote work. One of it's hard to see the bright side of the pandemic, but it was Rahm Emanuel, former advisor to Barack Obama, who said we must never let a good crisis go to waste. One of the most significant learnings of the last year, since March, when Jamaica recorded its first positive case of COVID, has been the utility of remote work. And it would be a shame if we were to be anxious to get back to exactly how the world was before March 2020. Certainly not how Jamaica was before March 2020, because we would have had 1 year to different degrees in different organizations of how remote work has played out. Some organizations have embraced it, some mixed and matched, and perhaps a blended approach is the future, where some days you work remotely and some days you work from the office. But what it has also done is opened up the whole world to us. Because if you can work in Havendale or in Portmore when your office is in downtown Kingston, you can also work in Havendale and Portmore, or indeed in Gimimibit or Montego Bay. And the job may be domiciled in Hungary or London or New York or Japan. Who knows? Because we also have examples of Jamaicans who have found work online while their regular day jobs have disappeared during the pandemic. And we need to study these. I say this to say that the whole notion of work has to be continuously updated. And our history with implementing the regulations that govern flexi work does not fill us with confidence, because the act was implemented in 2014. But some of us will recall that it took years, even after we had long agreed, when the different, as I say, around the tripartite at the LAC and elsewhere, when we did the public consultations, workers liked it, employers liked it, everybody liked it, but it still took a long time to get implemented. The fact is that if we as Jamaicans are going to find the new openings, the new jobs that the world offers, we have to be much quicker in putting in place the arrangements that make it possible, because the world is not going to sit down and wait for us. We have to learn now how to, my mom used to say, how to walk and chew gum at the same time, how to whistle and ride. But more important, and it comes back again to what I started with, that dialogue, the sensitizing of the stakeholders, not just workers. And I'm soon come back to that. The consultation that allows for all parties to feel satisfied. Everybody must come away from the table with something. The spirit of Hugh Lawson Shearer and Portia Simpson Miller must be that everybody gets something. There's no winner and loser. Everybody can win if we get together and get this thing done properly. But what is it we want to get done properly? First, we have to recognize that the nature of work will have to change. I mean, there's a generational change. Youngsters, they like gig work. You know, many years ago, I sat down, I was in a similar meeting. And in the pre-meeting meeting, I was talking to two eminent Jamaican ladies. And they were saying that they don't understand how the boys just stay home. They're talking about their sons, well-educated, but they stayed home. And the conclusion was that if they had the choice to work for 3 days, 3 12-hour days, or to push to the 40 hours and get 4 days of what they would consider free time, they would do it. And I quickly came to the conclusion, and this was a decade ago, that younger Jamaicans value their time even more so than the predictability of a 9-to-5, Monday to Friday job that the baby boomers like myself looked forward to. So we have two imperatives pushing us: the nature of the world, and how the opportunities have changed, and also the attitudes of younger generations who are more flexible in their thinking. Now, I said, let me get back to the original notion. The fact is that there are infrastructure changes we have to make. Carla, I was impressed to hear Carla, who's an attorney at law, mention the IT infrastructure, but she would have seen it up front and close, that we have to ensure that the enabling infrastructure is there. And in this case, broadband. We have to ensure that Jamaica has Jamaicans, all Jamaicans, because we don't want to widen the digital divide. We want to ensure that Jamaicans have access to broadband. We have to ensure that when you have access to broadband, you have access to quality training, because we have to skill and reskill, not just young, but middle-aged and old, because Jamaica has to execute that digital transformation. But that's a whole other debate for another time. But once we talk about the management, we talk about productivity, we talk about management, we talk about technology, we talk about tools. But the biggest challenge I've seen, and speaking frankly as an employer, speaking frankly as somebody who has a foot in the private sector and in the public sector, in Jamaica and outside of Jamaica, the biggest challenge I've seen is the challenge to change our mindsets. And I will willingly concede that to change the mindset of workers perhaps is easier than to change the mindset of managers. Workers, especially working mothers, having been faced with online schooling. Children have been home in many instances for a whole year. Appreciate not having to sit in traffic, sit in a bus, sit in a car, sit on the Nelson Mandela Highway or the Port Causeway for an hour to get to work in the morning, again in the evening. They appreciate the time home, although some of them are stressed and tell me that, boy, the teachers should get some combat pay because of they never realized looking after multiple children at home could be so difficult, and juggling that with getting work done. But the fact is that changing the mindset of workers is perhaps easier than changing the mindset of employers. Yes, there are progressive companies that have quickly embraced remote work, but for every story like that, we have the story where I have had to inquire, why has the head of a department, or why has some CEO asked for all the workers to come back out as soon as the government eases the COVID restrictions? And the answer I invariably get is that many, many managers have still not yet put in place a system where they can actually measure output. We have really wasted in many instances a year, because without the measurement, they are not confident it's done. But I would want to caution many managers that seeing somebody shuffling paper on a desk for 8 hours in a day does not in any way, if you don't have some system to measure output in place, you are fooling yourself, or it's an illusion of work when people just turn up and are under your control. So we have a psychological hang-up in Jamaica about control. So that change in mindset will have to take place if we are going to get the benefits, the full benefits of any change in legislation, any change in regulation, any change in working arrangements. The last point I want to make, or perhaps the last point I want to make, is the whole issue, and it's a thorny one, but it will require, again, very earnest social dialogue and tripartism, and that is the issue of the social safety net. Because we don't want to move from arrangements where workers have tenure, where workers have predictability, they can look forward to going to work and they know what the outcomes are. If we are shifting to a new paradigm, which we must, because the new normal must reflect a new paradigm of a more productive, a more flexible, a more globally competitive workforce, we must talk about the social safety net and who pays for it. As it currently stands, the employers pay the entire budget of the Heart Trust NTA. We pay for training, and much of this training has to reflect the new realities of work. The employers still make a contribution to other social benefits, the housing trust and so on. But the fact is that even the social safety net we have now, one, it's not universal. It doesn't cover all Jamaican citizens. I mean, the NIS after over 50 years still doesn't cover every Jamaican. Many Jamaicans will go beyond the years which they can actually be productive and not have a pension. not have any benefits to look forward to in their later years, or a much reduced benefit. We have long talked about health insurance in Jamaica, which would be necessary, especially given the risks of future pandemics. And we have seen that our system has been stretched, even though it has not broken, but it has exposed many weaknesses in our system that would need to be addressed by a more robust safety net. So we will have to talk about a more robust social safety net, but not one that puts a excessive charge on employers, because what that will do is become a disincentive to the formalization of employment contracts. So the balancing going forward has to be, yes, contracts that are flexible and take into account remote work, take into account shorter terms, because our youngsters like the whole concept of a gig economy and gig work, but also one that does not leave citizens, and I say citizens in the broadest sense, because many workers will be on account or in small and medium enterprises, but does not leave them exposed to the vagaries of fortune. I'm home to answer any questions, but I hope that my contribution has been useful.
Thank you very much, Wayne, and we really thank you for those very, very informative points and ideas. And I recognize my mic should be reopened.
Yes.
So let me go again. Thank you very much, Wayne. You have been giving us some very informative ideas, information, and certainly what it says to us, as you have correctly said, is that flexible work arrangements really opens us up to the whole world, the entire world. And we are open 24 hours every day of the year in some instances. And I just want to say that we have even experienced this in our streaming today. We have recognized that persons have identified themselves as persons who are living in the United States. We have Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Canada, and the UK. So we have streamed live, and we are also having persons engaging with us from many other countries. And
I should make one small comment here.
Go ahead, please.
Many of us may not have recognized it, but business process outsourcing, which was employing close to 40,000 Jamaicans before the pandemic, was the fastest growing sector in the country. But it had also transformed itself from just business process outsourcing to global services. We have to adopt a global services mindset to understand that we are not restricted by the boundaries of Jamaica. We are restricted by our training, we are restricted by our technology, and we are restricted by our laws and regulations.
Thank you very much for that point, because I also had noticed that and noted that you said that global competitiveness of our workforce should be our central focus. And flexible work arrangements is just one of those pathways towards that global competitiveness of our workforce. So we recognize that it is something that everybody must feel a part of. And you said in very good Jamaican language, everybody must get something from flexible work arrangements. And our workers are listening in, our employers are listening in, Jamaica's job seekers are listening in, and the globe is listening to us today. And I just want to encourage persons to like and share the discussion on the various social media platforms. We have Facebook at MLSS Jamaica. We have GIS at GIS Voice. We have PBCJ at PBCJ, and Nationwide at Nationwide 90 FM. And this will be also included in the chat for those persons who want to get the information. On YouTube, we are on the Ministry of Labor and Social Security's platform. And I just want to also invite persons who are listening in to participate in giving their comments to the COVID-19 Labor Market Task Force. And you can do so by sending an email to covid19lmt@mlss.gov.jm. So I'll repeat, covid19lmt@mlss.gov.jm. And we have already shared our WhatsApp and toll-free numbers. So at this time, I will invite our final presenter, and she is Mrs. Helene Davis-White. Hi, Helene, how are you doing?
Hi, Gillian. Doing well. Having had both my jabs, or in the Jamaican parlance, jukes in my arms.
And I'm sure,
yes.
I'm sure you're encouraging all Jamaican workers and employers to be vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus.
Well, certainly.
As many as are willing and ready. And remember, it's an option whether or not you are going to be vaccinated, but the Ministry of Labor and Social Security encourages persons, as many as are willing and ready, to be vaccinated as they continue employment. However, it is to be noted that workers should not be penalized in any way, shape, or form if it is that they have delayed their choice of vaccination. So Mrs. Helene Davis-White is president of the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions and general secretary of the Jamaica Association of Local Government Officers, otherwise called JALGO. And she has been a trade unionist for many, many years, 40 years, and calls herself a trade unionist by profession. Now, Helene, you have sat on many boards of government. You have been part of many of the initiatives in relation to growth and development of enterprise in Jamaica, and definitely of the labor force. What has been your experience in terms of workers' experience with workers who are engaged in flexible work arrangements? What are the challenges? What are the lessons learned? And what do you think needs to be done to position Jamaica as a regional leader in remote work? Over to you, Helene.
Okay, thank you, Gillian. I want to start at the risk of being repetitive.
Can you turn on your camera if it's not on?
It's on.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I want to start from the point of view of looking at flexible work arrangements generally, and to make the point that I think has been made, but I think which is important to restate, that flexible work arrangements include a gamut of ideas and ways of working that would not that are different from the traditional forms of working that most of us would be accustomed to. I am a child of the 70s. I entered the workforce in the 1970s, and that was at the point when we had established the 40-hour work week, 5-day 40-hour work week. And many of us who entered the workforce at that time are wedded to the 5-day 40-hour work week. But what we have found is that many younger workers, as I think Wayne indicated earlier, are not as wedded to the 5-day 40-hour work week as we are. And in fact, we have seen situations where many workers would want to work longer days and shorter weeks. And so those are some of the things that are possible with flexible work arrangements. In the case of Jamaica, I think the Flexible Work Arrangements Act tended to focus on how we arranged working hours. So it really amended several legislation that focused on working hours, working time, and there was less focus on other forms of flexible work arrangements, such as remote working. when we look at the issue of remote work, some people use the term interchangeable, remote work and work from home, but they are not exactly the same, because remote work actually speaks to the ability for workers to work away from the physical workspace, a physical office. It may in fact be your home, but it could be anywhere at all that you prefer to carry out your duties. In our situation, the pandemic has sort of brought the whole issue of remote work to the fore, because you know, because of the concerns with regard to the ability of employers to maintain physical distancing in the physical workspace, and the need to ensure that workers and clients were able to interact in a safe and healthy way. The whole issue of work from home and remote work was really put squarely on the agenda for us in Jamaica. What we have found is that in respect to remote work, it does not require the same kind of abilities. It requires a different set of abilities, resources, and skills, both on the part of the employer and the employee. On the part of the employer, it may in fact require that the employer envisages or put in place proactive communication skills, because your workers now are not going to be in front of you. You are not going to be able to see them face to face, but they are still your workers. You have to have some means of being able to communicate with them. So it now calls for that proactive communication skill on behalf of employers. It also means that employers, supervisors, managers will have to depart from the traditional supervisory, the different ways, the traditional ways of supervising workers, which was really based on looking at the time spent at work. So you, in many workplaces, your supervisor felt that you were very efficient if they saw you at your desk sitting for the full 8 hours for the day. The minute you got up, you were not being non-productive, and they felt the need to see you at the desk, and that is what determined for them that you were being productive. What it now requires is that the employers and the supervisors will have to move to a situation where, instead of looking at the time spent on the job, they actually focus on the completion of tasks and deliverables and objectives rather than the time spent on the job. And of course, it will mean, as a result of that in terms of even how payment systems are developed, we may have to relook our payment systems, because most of our payment systems are in fact based on time spent. I don't think it is beyond us, because you know, in certain factories, they were able to develop system based on, like in garment factories, it was about piecework. So it was about how you were able to complete various pieces of a garment, the number of pieces that you are able to complete. I'm pretty sure that there are means now of being able to determine how a worker can productively carry through various tasks and objectives. So
Helene, if I may interject, because we want to roll into the Q&A quickly, but I have seen a comment here, or rather question, whether you think it's legal for employers to install cameras in this new place of work, the home. Do you want to respond to that quickly?
I would not see that. I'm not sure how legal it is, but certainly it would not be encouraged, because to my mind, it's an invasion of the person's privacy. And in the same way that you would not install, say, a camera in a bathroom or so on, I believe those are issues that we have to look at. And you see, when you are looking at installing a camera, you have not really changed your mindset as an employer, because that employer is interested in seeing that the worker is sitting before the device. If the worker is not sitting before the device, it means that the work is not being done. And it really is speaking to, as we said, the new skills that are going to be required if remote working is going to become something, this departure from the traditional way of operating. So certainly managers will have to move away from that, I believe.
So I'm hearing you join the Caribbean Employers Federation, Mr. Wayne Chen, in suggesting that a mindset change is going to be required on the part of both the worker and the employer for us to be very successful as we implement flexible work arrangements.
Certainly, and we don't think it's beyond us because of our history of tripartism and social dialogue within our Jamaican landscape. Just to quickly move on to some of the benefits that we see of remote working, and then to look at the challenges that we have identified so far. Benefits identified for employers include lower cost of running your offices. Certainly utility bills may be reduced as a result because you won't have all your workers at work at the same time. You'll have less travel related problems, meaning that if we have bad weather, most workers are unable to travel into work at the same time. You won't have that if you are into remote work. And your talent pool for recruitment as an employer will be much wider, because now you're not going to be limited to workers in a particular geographic location. They can be almost anywhere in the world. Benefits for workers that we see: less commuting in some instances, no more commuting at all. And I can speak to that. I am so happy that I don't have to spend almost 2.5 hours in the morning leaving my home as early as 5:45 to get to work at 9 o'clock. And you know, the fact that I don't do that.
Presenteeism and punctuality should be improved with flexible work arrangements. Oh, yes. I agree with you.
The fact that from the workers' standpoint, they have the ability to put in place their work environment as it suits them. Because when you're in an office, it's about, you know, everybody, how it suits everybody. But in your situation, you're now going to be able to create your own work environment. And the worker will have more ability to be able to deal with their family obligations working from home. And of course, when we look at the challenges, we realize that it has created a challenge as well as a result of how we have been implementing. So in respect of challenges of remote work that we have actually identified as a trade union movement. One, so the flip side of the coin of the worker having more time for family obligations because you're not traveling. I think for many workers in Jamaica, the travel time per day is actually 4 to 5 hours to travel to and from work for many of our workers. The truth is that although that has improved, one of the challenges that we have identified is this whole thing about workers' inability to disconnect from work. A lot of employers believe that because you are available through whether telephone or internet, they can contact you at any hour, day or night, and they expect you to answer, or they expect you to answer the call or to respond to an email, regardless of whatever hour of day or night. So it has now created a situation where essentially workers are working longer hours Because if your employer expects you to be looking and listening for a call and be able to respond, you're ending up with longer working hours. And so that is something that we have now to be able to deal with. Another challenge that we have identified as well is the perception of some employers that because you're working from home, things like sick leave and vacation leave are no more. Because you're at home. So if you're sick, what kind of leave do you need because you're home? And so that is one challenge that we have identified as well. Another challenge is the responsibility for occupational safety and health. A lot of workers have indicated they are working from home. They would not have had an office chair at home. So the issue of ergonomics comes in, and they are the ones that are being held responsible now for issues like that. So that is another challenge that we have identified. And another flip side to the coin of your ability to work from home is the issue of alienation. Not all of us are really made for the kind of lifestyle where we are not seeing people face to face. I will tell you that I have seen my granddaughter, who is in first form at school, has never met most of our friends face to face, but she calls them her friends and she speaks with them regularly. But I think younger people are born into that kind of environment, so they adapt more to it. For older workers, I think we're going to have a problem we are already experiencing that problem with a feeling of alienation. And you know, in a situation where you have some persons working from the office and some persons working from home, the persons who are working from home feel that they are forgotten. And that is something that we have to deal with as well, which goes back to one of the points I made earlier about a skill that the employer has to have, which is about proactive communication, making sure that you keep in touch with all your workers, whether they are in front of you or they're working from home. Moving now to recommendations. We believe that the Flexible Work Arrangement Act need to be properly codified. A lot of workers and employers, when we tell them there is a Flexible Work Arrangement Act, they go and take it up. They say, well, this really means nothing to me. All I see is a long list of laws that have been amended. How does that tell me that, you know, we do in fact have an ability to do X, Y, or Z? So we feel that it has to be properly codified, and along with that, the ministry and the tripartite generally believe has to come together to look at some standard kind of policy that can be implemented by any employer anywhere, so that at the end of the day, you can have that easy ability of the employer to refer to some document that exists somewhere. We feel that we have to look at some of our laws, certainly occupational safety and health. We have to look at the Occupational Safety and Health Act to make sure that it takes on board the concerns of workers who are involved in remote work. Your NIS, your workplace injury, will, if I'm injured at home while doing my job at home, will that be considered to be a workplace injury? Issues like those we feel have to be looked at in the context of the current legislation. We also feel that we have to have a situation where the Ministry of Labor will have to strengthen, we believe, its ability to provide information on labor market needs. Because if we are going into this sphere of remote work, you know, a lot of school leavers, when they're looking at employment, they're looking at traditional employment, going into a workplace and being able to deliver services there. We, I think, in the labor market, in the Ministry of Labor, should be able to lead that. The fact is that you do have the labor market information system, and so you should have an ability to be able to present that information so that school leavers will know that these are the labor market needs of the future, so that they are not going in, I mean, no disrespect to Carla, but they are not going in wanting to be a lawyer or a doctor or the traditional things. Because if you look at a lot of young workers now, they do not leave their home again, I can refer to to my children. They are involved, although they are employed in a traditional work. They conduct business using Instagram, and they're doing selling all sorts of things. And for them, that is more something that they want to do more than going into the physical workspace. As soon as they are able to, they are surely going to be leaving that physical workspace. So that is something I think that in terms of the ministry's ability to provide labor market information, it has to strengthen that so that it can properly advise workers coming out into the workplace now. So I think that is basically it in terms of recommendations and the challenges that we have found with remote work. And I would want to end by saying, as did we, that remote working is really here to stay. It is what and I think it was also mentioned by Lauren in his research as well, that this is what they call them Generation Z, whatever it is now. They are more comfortable in that kind of work environment. And that being the case, we now have to ensure that the tripartite can come together and make sure that we put in place the kind of framework that allows remote working to be done for the benefit of all participants in the labor market.
Thank you very much, Helene, and you have given us so much food for thought. And I just want to say that you have called for the codification of the Employment Flexible Work Arrangements Act. As you've indicated, if someone takes up that piece of legislation, yes, it is an enabling legislation, but it doesn't tell you in terms of guidelines, in terms of how to implement flexible work arrangements. And the ministry takes very seriously that concern. The panelists have been quite interactive in their presentations. We're going to be taking a few questions. But before I do that, Helene and others, I just want you to note a comment from a notable trade unionist, and he is Sir Hugh Lawson Shearer. And he indicated, and Michaela can weigh into this when we get to the Q&A section, indicated that productivity should not be measured by how many gallons of perspiration is squeezed from the worker. That's a very, very profound statement. And we just want in the Q&A section for Michaela to open with that. As we move forward in the session, we have with us the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica, represented by Mr. Michael McAnuff Jones. And I'm just going to ask Mr. Jones to open his mic to just give a brief comment on the presentations that he's heard. In a few seconds, Michael, please give your comments.
Thanks, Julia, and hi, colleagues. These presentations are outstanding. I believe it has provided a great collective of resources for us to move forward with further conversations. The HERMAD supports the recommendations we have heard. I think the reflections we have heard are clearly very important for what we need to do. One of the things we're hoping we will see is some research on the impact of flexible work arrangements on businesses that depend on people being physically at work. So while we strongly support work from home and remote work, we understand the implications for businesses that rely upon people being at work. And these businesses also employ people. So it's one of the things we're hoping some research.
You need to unmute his mic.
Sorry. Yes. Did anybody hear anything I said? I don't know. Yes. So I was making the point that we are very clear that all we have heard supports the views we have about the need to move to a new philosophy around results-based leadership. The new direction certainly helps with work-life balance and certainly will help to retain people who would otherwise decide to leave their jobs because they can't handle the demands. one of the things I didn't hear, which I certainly want to emphasize, is the opportunity in all of this for us to look at job sharing, which is a key element of flexible work arrangements. And in an economy such as ours, there is an opportunity for people to consider job sharing as a way of ensuring that we can employ more people. Overtime is a legacy, kind of part of our legacy culture, and maybe there are economic issues related to it. But I suspect that there are many occasions where we do need to have the labor force expanded, and perhaps the reason why some of these challenges exist is because we're not very clear that overtime is necessary. And many times that it is necessary, it is because there's an opportunity to have somebody else. So job sharing, which is a key element of work from home and remote work arrangements and flexible work arrangements, is something for us to examine as we go forward as a way of expanding employment opportunities for Jamaicans. So those are my comments, but very interesting.
Thank you very much.
And very useful.
Thank you very much. And as we wrap up, I'm going to ask our presenters for just one last comment. Wayne, I want you to comment on implications for informality. There's somebody asking us that question from the UK. Just quickly, Wayne.
Informality is a huge challenge in Jamaica, and it's not an indication that Jamaicans are criminal-minded. No such thing. It's an indication that there is something structurally wrong with formalizing work arrangements, and we have to attack it at the core. We have to ensure that the cost of formal employment does not outweigh the benefits of staying in the informal sector.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Michael Kennedy. Question coming from St. Elizabeth asking, can I refuse to work remotely or flexibly?
That's a good question. It's a question that we get sometimes. In life, everybody has a choice. So I'm sure the worker can refuse, but the problem that the ministry would have with that is, what is the alternative? The alternative in most situations is that the employer is going to say, since you cannot or refuse to work remotely, then I'm going to lay you off without pay. So workers have to understand that it's a collaboration. Can I be flexible? Can I be less rigid? Can I try to work teamwork up with the employers? It's just like a co-pilot and a pilot. Both have to work together as a team, or else you're not going to reach where you're going.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. And question to Mikhail and Carla quickly. Do you believe that the code is required to codify the act will help us to work better remotely? Just quickly so that we can wrap up. Michaela?
All right, so just to the point of, are you hearing me now?
Go ahead, yes.
So just to the point of how we measure productivity, that is definitely key. We can't talk about how to get to productivity improvement if we're not careful in how we measure. But what's important is that when we talk about productivity, we're actually thinking about productivity improvement. We're not talking about working people harder. We're actually thinking about how can we get people to work smarter rather than harder. So we're not trying to extract more sweat, and we have to be careful in truth about how we make that measurement. I think it would also be important for us to have legislation in place and to have that prepared so that we have a system in place that employers as well as workers are sure of, so that they know what is.
I'm going to ask Lauren to open his mic,
and that
Michaela, and I know we're going to be getting more comments on this, but just going to ask Lauren to give me his quick comment because we have to wrap up quickly.
Gillian, quickly. So from me, the first thing is this, colleagues, any initiative or policy or training associated with flexible work arrangement, I'm saying to you that it should be research driven. Mr. Chen would have agreed with that particular point. Secondly, I want to also say to employers that before you implement any kind of flexible work arrangement, that you need to do some amount of forecasting to assess the impact on the worker and on the company as well. And lastly, I will implore employers again to communicate with their employees if they intend to put in place any kind of flexible work arrangement or remote working arrangement.
Very vital.
Yes, thank you.
Be unmuted. Oh, thank you very much for your comments. We are out of time, unfortunately, and we want to thank all the media houses. We want to thank Nationwide. We want to thank Jamaica News Network, PBCJ. We also want to thank Power 106, GIS, and obviously our colleague presenters today at the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. Thank you very much for joining us in our Labour Talk series as we spoke on advancing flexible work arrangements in Jamaica, positioning Jamaica as a regional leader in remote work. I am Jillian Corodas, having been your moderator for today. It has been certainly my pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.